Okay, it's time for the next project. But first, anybody who's already subscribed to my channel will notice that I've changed the name of my channel. The old name was kind of hokey and wasn't really serious. The new average DIY guy seems to fit a little bit more of what I do. Um, just a normal guy works a normal job, and I have an interest in hobbies and doing things on my own to save money. So I've got no professional training. It's all either self-taught or things I learned over the years through family members and similar situations. Kind of how a lot of regular home DIY people do. Also a lot from YouTube. I watched YouTube for years. I've done a lot of projects off YouTube and learned a lot of different things through different videos and other content creators. So look up anybody else that does this type of stuff and you may learn something. But on to the next project. The house my wife and I are currently living in, we bought it as the oldest and worst house in the best neighborhood in town. If you're into any type of real estate or anything like that, that's a really good way to buy if you do DIY or interested in home renovation. Because we can spend some time updating the house, and when we go to sell, we'll get our monies back out of it. Or at least that's the plan and the hope. So on to the next projects for the house will be, I've got 2 bathrooms and a laundry room left to renovate, and then the entire first and second floor is finished. Doing bathrooms does get pricey between everything you have to do, tubs, tile, and vanities. And that's where we've kind of come across a hiccup. Nothing wrong with our tubs or showers. The tiling's not that difficult. I'm going to do that, and that'll be part of a series on this channel. But the vanities are the biggest issue I came across. Currently, the cost of vanities has gone through the roof. It's related to the COVID stuff. Everybody's at home doing projects, purchasing, houses are still being built, the demand's gone up, the prices have gone up. And I can't choke down new vanity prices for something that won't really take me that long. And doesn't really take that much skill to build. So don't be scared. There's tons of videos on there, or on YouTube, on how to do this. So just just kind of be bold and take a risk and do it. But first, let me show you what I'm working with here. Those will be my new vanities. Some assembly required. I need a 36-inch vanity for my guest bath, and the master bath actually needs a 72-inch vanity, and that's where the biggest expense comes in. 72-inch double sink vanity. We were pricing around $1,500 for something decent quality, and over $2,000 for something cabinet like custom or higher. And to be honest, it's really not that difficult to do. It takes a little time and a little patience. So let me show you what I'm working with. The carcasses, or the boxes of the cabinets themselves, will be 3/4 inch. This is birch plywood. It's a cabinet grade, so it's sanded finish on both sides, and it can be stained if need be. We're going to paint these. White's the fashion in now, so they're going to get painted white. Above that is a 1/4 inch plywood, and that'll be used specifically for the backs of the vanities, because they don't need to be seen, they don't need to be structural. And they'll also be the faces for the doors and drawer fronts. I'm going to build a shaker style, is the fashion that's in right now. Real simple to build. It's a framed 1x material, and then it has the inset door faces. The face frames and the frames for the doors and drawers will be 1x alder. It is, I bought 1x6 in 8-foot lengths. I could buy 1x2, but when I figured out the cost, it would cost almost twice as much to build these at a 1x2 than it is by 1x6. Split them in 3 pieces. I'm only needing 1.5 inch material. In a 1x6, I can actually get 3.5 inch material pieces out of it. So that's what I'm going to be working with. I don't have my hardware in yet, but I'm going to use a soft close full extension drawers slides, and we'll use soft close cabinet door hardware as well, so it'll feel good and quality. So I also have come up with my plans. I use Google SketchUp. It's free for kind of the home version of it. And so I have plans for my 72-inch vanity. I have plans for my 32-inch vanity, or 36-inch vanity, sorry. The 72-inch doors. So let me kind of describe these. So for the 36, it's going to be 4 drawers and then a 5th wide drawer below the cabinet. The cabinet will have 2 doors, and that's where the sink basin will be. It'll actually be offset from center. On the 72, it's going to be a similar design. It's going to be 4 drawers down both sides. The sink basin will actually be in the middle. There'll be 2 drawers per basin, and then 2 wide doors at the very bottom. It seemed to be kind of a style when I was doing some searching and stuff, trying to figure out what we wanted to do, and I decided to run with it. And then I have plans for my doors and drawer fronts for each one. Now, why did I make plans? Because it's a relatively simple design. When you make plans, you can kind of lay out how you're going to break down your material. You can save a lot of material and reduce your waste. My drawers are all the same height, so I can just mass produce my styles. The widths are different, so I have to compensate for those. When it comes to the vanities themselves, they do share a lot of components. So the outside pieces are the same, the inside structural supports are the same, and that's a lot of material I can save by just mass break those out together. So I even went to the extent of laying out my sheets of 3/4 plywood and how I'm going to cut them. I don't normally do this, but since this is going to be a kind of a pretty large build, I wanted to see how much material I can save by doing it this way. And actually I saved quite a bit. There'll be pretty limited scrap use, or scrap on this. So I'm going to start breaking down my material, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to begin by cutting my face frame pieces to their rough lengths. I do this just to make the pieces easier to manage, because I'm going to do the final cut to lengths using the table saw and crosscut sled. That method's far more accurate than the miter saw. Plus, you'll see on some of these boards the kind of stepped in cut I get with the miter saw due to using this 2-cut method where I score it across the top and then come back full length, and that's to reduce tear out on the end of the board. I just make sure I get all my pieces that I need out of this, since each one of these planks will actually be ripped down to 3 individual pieces. So once that's done, again, I move over to the crosscut sled where I'm going to square up one end of each board. I mark the ends with an X, so I make sure that I only cut each end one time. And you can see here that the step in from that the miter saw cut a little more pronounced. I'm also going to do this in one total pass because of the blade height, so I get a nice smooth end to it. If you look carefully, there's some points where the blade has a thicker contact on one end versus the other during the cut, and that's just because how unsquared the miter saw is compared to this method. So once all the boards are squared on one end, I'm going to measure each board to its final length and then come back with the crosscut sled and cut waste off. You can see on the ends of a lot of these boards, again, that 2-step method, the miter saw cuts. And you'll also be able to tell that the cutoff piece is thicker on one side than the other on a couple of these. And again, that's just the crosscut sled being more square than the miter saw. Most of these pieces will get cut into 3, and then the final width of each of these pieces will be used for the face frames. That's why I ended up not having so many pieces compared to what the face frame assembly is when it's finished. I also end up using the stop block on a couple of these. It just kind of saves time. I only have to measure the final length of one piece, and then I can put the stop block in place, and I can just come back with each subsequent piece and cut it all at once. I don't have to measure each one individually. It's far more accurate, this method. Now that the pieces are cut to final length, I'm going to rip them down to their final width. Final width of the face frame pieces are 1.5 inches. The poplar board here is 1x6, which is a 5.5 or 5.25 inch nominal width. So I'm going to go through and rip each one down, and I can get 3 pieces of the face frame out of each one of these boards with just a little bit of waste. My plan for this is to reduce waste as much as possible and reduce cost at the same time. So this was the cheapest method with wasting the least amount of material. I can also use my cutoffs there for stickers for some wet lumber that I get. So now I'm going to lay out each face frame. This is the one for the 72-inch cabinet. It's kind of how it's going to be. And then I cut these spacers using waste cutoffs to space each of these rails appropriately and where they need to be. And then I also did the same thing for the 36-inch vanity. Now this one's face up. This is how it's going to look. I do need to flip it over before I drill the holes. I'm going to use pocket holes to attach the face frame pieces to each other. I ended up getting this Craig K5. This thing's fantastic. Should have done it years ago. Hooks to a vacuum and is relatively dust free. Also, the rate that I can drill these things far exceeds the cost that this thing is. I've used an old clamp-on one for years, and I totally regret having that clamp-on one compared to this. After all the pocket holes are drilled, it's time to lay it out. Start putting these spacers in here, and you can see how they work. They'll keep the rails from moving up and down or side to side from my viewpoint while they're being mounted or screwed together. I also glue my pocket hole joints. They say that this isn't necessary, and it may not be, but I'm more confident in glue than I am screws and hardware. So what I do is I put some on there, and then I pretty much pack it into the pores of the wood. The end grain of wood is kind of like a bundle of straws. It's a bunch of holes, and the more glue I can get packed into that, the better. It's very time consuming to do this, I understand, but to me I feel like I get a better joint out of it. If I don't get 100% strength out of the glue and I only get 20%, that's 20% more strength than what I had with just the hardware. The spacer is going to keep it from moving side to side. I'm going to clamp it to keep it from moving up and down. That's probably the biggest defect in Craig joinery, is the boards want to move in the direction of the screws as they get pulled tight, and you need to prevent that as much as possible for a flat finish. Also, with Craig's recommendation, it's 2 screws per inch of board or per nominal inch. So right now this is 1 by 1.5 or 3/4 by 1.5. So it would be a 1 by 2. I need to have 2 screws in there for that. And we're going to speed up the video just to cut down on your guys' viewing. And I'm just going to work my way down this down the stile here, attaching them all on one side first. After all those are attached, I'm going to come back and do the other piece. I'm going to put the spacers in on this side as well, so I don't even have to measure. And then I will do the same process, glue and clamp and screw. So once I've gone through all of that, my face frames are completed. They're good and solid, they're properly aligned, and they are flush. There'll be very, very little sanding to get these all to line up appropriately or how they're supposed to be. I then get to move on to the carcass boxes. I use my DeWalt. This is the 60 volt 7 1/4 inch circular saw. I love this saw. It is just as powerful as my corded one that I had. and replaced with this. I'm using this Craig, I'm not sure if it's the crosscut or rip cut, whatever this jig is. I'm not a huge fan of this. You do have to get the saw and the fence that you're running along the edge there to move at the exact same pace. If one moves faster than the other, it starts to curve. But I am using it right now just to do a rough breakdown of these panels to, again, make them more easier to manage. Do a lot of this stuff by myself, so breaking stuff down to make it easier to manage just benefits me. I also put the board on top of, this is pink foam board insulation, and the saw is not going to get hurt by that stuff, and it raises it up off the deck so I don't damage any of the other material underneath because I am working on top of my stock. I do have also, you can see the hose hooked up to my cordless circular saw. I have a cordless circular saw now with a hose attached to it, so it's no longer cordless. This is my attempts at dust collection. The corded dust chute for the DeWalt fits the cordless saws. Usually it works better than this. I'm not sure what its deal is today. It's just blowing dust all over the place. I think the suction, the filter on the vacuum's clogged and doesn't have as much suction as it would normally have. So after the long piece is cut off, I'm going to come back with my door board. This is a custom built piece for my saw. This is my preferred method of breaking plywood down. I just didn't have an 8-foot length version of it, so I had to use the cross cut on the other way. Pretty much the same idea. It follows a fixed fence, and it actually prevents quite a bit of tear out. Just make sure you cut on, or you mount the door board on the keep side of the board and not the waste side of your scribe line. I now get to do the sketchiest part of this entire build, is I get to cut this to final width. I'm alone doing this, and this piece I believe was 8 foot long. I have a roller support behind me that's holding one end up as I push it through the saw, and then the stock on the other side is going to work as my outfeed table. It's just a little shy of my table saw, but once I drop this piece on it, you'll see that it almost lines up perfectly. So after all my plywood is broken down to its final size, I get to cut a dado into the side panels of each piece. The dado is going to be there to receive the 1/4 inch backing. It does need to be offset from the edge by the thickness of the plywood, and that's going to be for the nailer strips that I mount to the back of the cabinets to help mount them to the studs of the wall. I could use a dado stack on this, but I only need to do this to 4 panels. So I'm just going to pretty much run I'm going to run all 4 pieces through the table saw and just move the fence as I go until I'm at the correct thickness of the dado I need. Here's a neat trick. These store labels that are on this plywood, a lot of people peel them off and then get sticky residue. Use a heat gun. It'll end up peeling off real easily. It leaves very little residue, and what's left just gets sanded off. And now I get a sand, and sand, and sand, and sand. These cabinet carcasses will be put together with Craig screws and glue again. I already drilled the Craig screws in this using that K5, which again made it an absolute breeze to do this. Be very careful not to sand through your veneer. I'm just doing a real fine 120 grit just so the paint sticks to it. And now time for assembly. I'm going to use the face frames to help assemble. That's why I did it this way. There's no measurement involved. Just glue and clamp it where it needs to go. I got these cool Craig clamps. I do own a lot of Craig products. Don't judge me. They make good stuff. They're very proud of their product. But it does work really, really well. These clamps save so much time. And I got to go through and align each panel as I screw each screw in and can clamp it down in place. So again, perfectly lined up every time with no real measuring. Once the center supports are done, it's time for the inside shelf. Again, a good dollop of glue and Craig screw it together. You can see the clamps that are clamped in place. Those are spacer blocks. They were put in to be the same height so that the shelf would be perfectly level inside the cabinet, perfectly parallel to the edges it needs to be. And then I'm going to pretty much walk across the cabinet, alternating holes, so screw clamp as I go. That way I can align this shelf as I go, and I'm not sitting there fighting these clamps and fighting the screws. You do get a little warpage in these panels when you cut them. This will help totally eliminate that. So once that shelf is in place, it is time for the sides. Well, correction, looks like I already got the sides on here, one of the sides. Same process as the inner supports. And then I'm going to put the base on. This base piece will strengthen this cabinet up quite a bit. At this point, only put one side on. You'll see why here in a minute when I put the back on. But this will be the same process. I sit here and I leapfrog the clamps versus screws and align the panel as I go. And then here I go leapfrogging clamps and screws. Again, just align the panel as you go, and that way it's perfect alignment and you don't have to worry about any warpage or any issues with that. And now it's time for the back panel. And you'll see that it goes right into the dado that I drilled into the side, and it sits on the base. Now this bottom base shelf is where I put the dado in by mistake. It's not needed, and again, it won't be seen because it'll be concealed by drawers. This is one of the nailer strips to mount the cabinet to the studs of the wall. It'll get cranked into the side and then drilled directly down into the bottom shelf there. And now it's time for the toe board. Again, I made spacer blocks for this, and this gives me a little room for your feet when you're standing up at the vanity so you don't kick it, jam your toes. Another good dollop of glue before getting Craig drilled and screwed into place. The 72-inch vanity needed some sort of center support. The face frame in the middle there will bow and flex if you don't put this piece in. Now the vanities are done. The 36-inch goes together in a similar fashion, and I get to move on to the next part, which would be the drawer boxes. So stay tuned for the next video.